I don't think anybody can turn the calendar to the month of October without thinking Danbury Fair thoughts. It's just an automatic response. It's October and it's time for the Danbury Fair.
When it turned fall, it was time for the fair, and the sun even had, Fair Week, the sun even looked different. When it was going down and when it was shining, it just seemed to be the fair sun and the fair leaves and the fair now it's just totally different. It just doesn't mean the same thing anymore.
With the passage of summer and the beginning of cold weather, the snow there, the night, the stars, everything that went with the turning of summer into fall was what was encapsulated in the Danbury Fair. There's nothing like it.
It was exciting watching the big top go up. It was the hub of the fair and another sign that Fair Week was only days away.
We helped put the big top up. We were just one crew. Of course, the fairgrounds employees were there, and then there were several other contractors around that contributed to workforce. We had the winch trucks, and we helped pull it up the poles after it was rigged. It was in 10 sections. The 10 sections had to be laced together, and of course, they were all laid out in sequence, so you had to know where they went. The 4 main center poles had a ring around them. It was a big, heavy metal ring. And there was a cable that went up to a pulley on top of the pole. So everything was laced to the rings on the poles. The tent was lifted up onto the roof. It was tied onto the roof. That whole perimeter had 2 cables around it.
It took a year to prepare for this moment, a year of hard work from many creative people. There was a saying that was true: every year the fair gets bigger and better. At times it seemed the fair would never be ready by opening day. But come Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. sharp, the cannon fired and the gates officially swung open, and the first of thousands of fairgoers flooded through the turnstiles. Surrounded by the foothills of the beautiful Berkshire Mountains, the Danbury Fair seemed to have been protected from the growth of the metropolitan area of New York City just beyond those hills. The Danbury Fair, a place that offered homemade jams and prize-winning gourds, farm animals, Ferris wheels, parades, shows, and music, welcoming anyone who would take the time to find their way to Danbury for a day of fun, excitement, entertainment, and education. There was nothing quite like it. Starting as an agricultural event, it developed into one of the most unique fairs in the country. For a small charge, you could board the sightseeing tram called the Hayride and see just about everything along the midways. So climb aboard, sit back, relax, and enjoy the fair.
The Hayride.
Welcome to Dutch Village. The fair began to attract people from the metropolitan areas, and General Manager John W. Leahy knew he had to alter the focus of the fair from agriculture to family-type entertainment in order to keep the interest and enthusiasm of the city people. While attending a fair meeting in Albany, New York, Mr. Leahy and his assistant general manager, C. Irving Jarvis, were entranced by a mural of New Amsterdam, a Dutch colony that predated New York City. This could be the attraction they were looking for. So while mixing business with pleasure, the idea of building a village that represented early New York was born. Builder-designer Mark Isley was brought in to work on the project. His know-how and devotion to detail transformed old horse barns into a living Dutch village with authentically styled buildings and windmills, filled with the romantic history of the nearby Hudson Valley.
John said, I want to build a Dutch village. I got these racehorse stables that I'd like to make over and make a village. So I said, okay, I'll do it. I said, but you know, I don't know anything about Dutch villages. He said, well, I've seen what you've done before. I just believe and trust that you can do this for me. And so we went over and started and got a crew of men and never had a blueprint, never had anything. It was all sandy there. I'd draw something in the sand and say, it's about what it's going to be, Mr. Leahy. The first building probably maybe the courthouse. That was stone. We had regular stone veneer front on that. Then we built the nursery where you first came in. Then we went right down through and did the church, the courthouse, the fort, the barracks. And most people didn't know because they only opened it 1 year, but we had a dungeon under the barracks. And he had these big cannons made, beautiful, great cannons. Put all those beautiful old-fashioned lamps all down through the promenade. Of all the things I'd done, that was the most interesting job I had.
This beautiful and peaceful area is where the fair really began. This trotting track existed in the 1860s. In the spring of 1869, Samuel H. Rundle and George C. White, seeking to formalize trotting horse racing in Danbury, joined Jacob Merritt, Benjamin Linus, and George Cowperthwaite in purchasing the track and surrounding acreage. They formed the association known as the Danbury Pleasure Park and began to run trotting races. In an effort to promote business in Danbury, the idea of holding an annual fair on the grounds was raised by the town fathers. A meeting of citizens was held with Lyman Keeler, the chairman, and J. Moss Ives, the secretary. And in 1869, the Danbury Farmers and Manufacturers Society was formed. The first Danbury Fair opened in October of 1869, and it ran for 3 days. Through the 1890s, horse racing was still the #1 attraction. A rivalry developed between the two top breeders, Sam Rundle's Ridgewood Stock Farm and William Beckerly's Hilltop Farm. Like many newly formed organizations, the Danbury Farmers and Manufacturers Society lived through troubled times. It took a number of years to attract crowds and for the income to exceed the losses. In October of 1897, the first major tragedy struck when a fire swept over the grounds after midnight, destroying everything except the wooden grandstand and the caretaker's house. With a small profit from previous years and some insurance available, the fair opened its 1898 season with the replacement of many of the buildings. Another financial blow occurred in 1918, when the fair never opened due to the great Spanish influenza epidemic that was sweeping the country. When the gates opened for the 1960 fair, the public was greeted with a higher level of entertainment and education. New Amsterdam Village had 35 permanent buildings spread over a beautifully landscaped 5-acre area. The village showed us many firsts the Dutch brought to America while they fought for political and religious freedom. The first lawyer, school teacher, fire department, minister, and even the coloring of Easter eggs. Concessionaires dressed in authentic Dutch clothing offered their wares, wooden shoes, Dutch chocolate, the glass blowers, and apple pie hot from a Dutch oven.
The Dutch bakery was a replica of a typical Dutch bakery in the Netherlands. It had what they called a beehive oven, which was a round-topped oven which held the heat in better, and that's where we baked our pies. We'd sprinkle them with Dutch dust, bake them, and put ice cream on them, and people loved them.
People would stay an hour in line for 2-3 hours for a slice of pie. I couldn't understand it. But these people knew if they didn't get it now, they weren't going to get it. And it was a special, unique to the fair.
We'd make probably about 10, 20,000 a day there. We'd end up with 50, 60,000 during a good year.
It averaged about a 20-hour day. And it was just wall-to-wall people. 12 pies, as fast as you can get them out. So it was a lot of work.
Them oxen they used to be at the manger all the time, facing the manger, so that it would be part of the activity scene. Then I had a donkey there all the time, too, for the activity scene. I used to sleep up in the haymow up there, and I used to sleep upstairs, and I would come down every morning and feed the cattle. They ask you all kinds of questions, you know. You see, they had a spread of horns. They're 5 feet apart there. And this lady asked me if I'd unscrew the horns every night and put them on the next day. You know? Now, why do they ask questions like that? I don't know, you know. And I said, lady, they grow that way, you know. They grow that way.
New Amsterdam, another example of John Leahy's efforts to contribute more to a fair than the usual. Education, history, and beauty.
Hayride.
That's right, partner. You're in Gold Town, where scenes like that holdup put you right in the middle of a typical American frontier town back in 1849. They robbed that saloon twice a day. Assistant General Manager C. Irving Jarvis spent many months of research and study of frontier towns in an effort to make Gold Town authentic to the era. The way people dressed, the buildings, and even the heroes and villains of those old Wild West communities. It may not have been as exciting back in the 1920s and 30s when this section of the fair was known as Church Row. It was lined with restaurants run by members of the various Protestant denominations, each owned and operated by its respective congregation. Through the years, those establishments became known for a particular culinary specialty. A favorite was oysters served by the Swedish Church. The Church of the Disciples produced chicken pies known for their large chunks of white meat and rich gravy. The Methodists, Universalists, and Episcopalians each became specialists in the concoction of delicacies from clam chowder to roast beef and turkey sandwiches to baked Virginia ham. You stood at counters to place your order at some stands, like today's fast food places. You took your order with you as you continued your tour or found a nearby bench to sit and relax. Some restaurants provided stools around their counters, while others had tables inside with white tablecloths. But times were changing, and many of the church members who cooked and served the food were gone. The younger people didn't have the enthusiasm or the time, and no one wanted the responsibility of management. So Church Row was remodeled and transformed into an old frontier town. With the popularity of Davy Crockett and television westerns, Gold Town opened with a blaze of glory in 1955. Statues of cowboys and Indians appeared everywhere. There was a fully equipped combination dentist office and barbershop with chair, drill, and other instruments of dental torture of the day. A piano player pounded on an old upright in the Golden Nugget Saloon while Billy the Kid threatened the bartender. A fully equipped blacksmith shop. A general store with an antique coffee grinder and a potbelly stove. In the sheriff's office, the sheriff guarded notable cutthroats, the James Boys, Calamity Jane, and Bob and Cole Younger. A fortune in stolen gold nuggets sat on his desk. The old prospector walked through town with his donkey, bearing stories of the Old West and his quest for gold. You could even test your luck and buy a grub stake at the old mine, pan for gold and take home your find. Passengers riding the restored stagecoach got a bit of the flavor of traveling through dangerous Indian territory. The Gold Town Hotel had statues of music hall girls who were seen in the windows, balconies, and even on the roof, smiling and waving to the gents in the streets below. Throughout the day, people packed the old music hall where they enjoyed a variety of entertainment.
We did about 3 shows a day, and then they had the parade in the middle. So we'd have a show at 11. People would start coming in 10:30, getting a good seat. And before you know it, all the aisles were standing, and in the walkways outside they were standing. And people had a chance to hiss and boo and cheer. And because it was local people and so many local people came there, that's why we had the big crowds, I think, because people liked to see the young children, and the area people really enjoyed seeing ones that they knew.
I walked into the theater, and a man came behind me, and he says, "Who are you?" I said, "Oh, just somebody that's going to sing here." "Oh." I said, "Well, who are you?" "Oh, I'm just a bum." I said, "You are? Well, sit down." He said, "You think I should have hired her?" I said, "I don't know." Well, he said, "I hope she's all right." You know who that was, don't you? That was Mr. Leahy with his very wry sense of humor. And there he'd come in his truck, old brooms, old mops, everything hanging out of the back. He was a wonderful guy. He really was.
Carolyn Chase and the AAA Ranch Gang played country western music using an old covered wagon for a bandstand.
We started messing around, playing, and it was our own little South camp, a bunch of hillbillies, musicians, and everybody would congregate at the house because I used to make some pretty good pies. We would practice until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Music just made us high. We didn't even need any crack or dope or anything. We just played because we liked it. So then, first thing you know, they said, "Well, we need a bass, we need this, we need that, because we can't sit here with a bunch of guitars. Who's going to play bass?" They stuck me with that. Bud played guitar, and then Dean Sterry played lead guitar, and Alan first played the fiddle. Ronnie Lindbergh played steel. Why we really were putting out music. It was over 20 years that we played the fair. The most beautiful, I'd say beautiful, and the greatest job that we ever had.
There was fun for everyone in Gold Town. And if you stayed long enough, you might even learn how the Old West was won.
The Hayride.
With beautiful fall foliage for a background, this area of the fair was the perfect location for the New England Village. This attraction opened in 1949. Main Street, Southern New England, was the replica of a New England village which was displayed for many months in Grand Central Terminal in New York City. It was purchased by the fair management as part of a new attraction. The village consisted of wooden front construction, something like the old Hollywood sets. Buildings were added to the fronts, providing a place for interesting displays and for the sale of New England products. Main Street had a general store, a theater, a colonial church with the sound of church bells provided by a tape and a speaker, a drugstore, dress shop, mineral museum, a wool spinning center, and a country furniture store. A pond with 2 islands was located in front of the village. A motor-powered, old-fashioned paddle wheel boat added a nautical touch while providing a pleasant ride for both kids and adults, accompanied by an armada of ducks and geese.
I was a captain on the boat. I was a captain on that. Oh, I loved that. Get them people on that boat blowing the horn, missing the ducks and all that stuff. Yeah, I did that every year for quite a while.
The village was flanked by 2 barns. This barn was converted from a barn which was part of the old fair farm operation. Live animals were cared for in the barnyard year-round. In 1953, this barn was converted to the town hall. The domestic science department was removed from the Big Top and established in New England Village to exhibit art and domestic work, long a country fair tradition. In 1968, the barn became a new vista of entertainment with live and animated displays featuring Dr. Dolittle and his friends. New England Village gave the patrons a place to relax, take advantage of the many benches placed around the lake, and watch the swans and ducks. This is the exciting Ride and Game Midway, and we'll be back to see it for sure. But look straight ahead at that big tent. The Big Top atmosphere was a combination of the smells of anise candy, fresh apples, pumpkins, flowers, and pine incense, blending together to produce an unforgettable fragrance. This was the heart of the fair, a central meeting place for all, a place where farmers, 4-H groups, and granges could gather together to show their skills and products to thousands of fairgoers. The agricultural section of the Big Top was managed by Arlene Yapel. Arlene came from a family of respected farmers and expert crop growers who were associated with the fair for over 35 years. As superintendent of the Big Top, Arlene skillfully and creatively supervised the many farmers and grange members who displayed their crafts, fruits, and vegetables under the Big Top.
My husband and I, we did exhibits at the fair starting in 1946 until 1981 when the fair closed. And so it kept us busy trying to think of new things to do every year. The American flag was the one we did for the last year. We cut stars out of Portland apples because they hold their white color better than other apples and dipped them in lemon and wax. We had to replace a few before the fair was over. Some of them lasted right through the whole fair time.
After a couple of years of polishing apples, there were blank tables, and I convinced Arlene Yapel to let me do one of the tables because my dad had a competition garden in Southbury. So with the vegetables that came from his garden and the vegetables that came from the Roberts garden, I managed to put a table together. There was over 150 varieties of vegetables that were required for the table.
I remember putting pumpkins and squash on the circular wooden platform that went all the way up to the top. It was very exciting just to be away from the usual farm routines and be out at the fair. That was a big thing for a young person to be able to do that.
My father got involved in the fruits and vegetables. We always had one big table in the big top, and very often we filled in other tables if other people didn't show up. But the fair wasn't just a October event for us. We started in the wintertime ordering special plants and seeds and grew special produce for the fair. My father was always trying to get as much stuff as he could. And back in 1926, my father had a new Model T Ford, and he took pumpkins to the fair.
Grandpa was a wonderful person, and he just loved sharing his information with people. It was absolutely amazing. He got his seeds from all over the world. He originated many of his own seeds. And we're not talking about 1 or 2 varieties. We're talking about 40 varieties of tomatoes, 90 varieties of pumpkins and squash, and then the different grains. And he developed his own seed, too. It was just amazing what he accomplished.
They had a contest they'd have a topic, and I remember one year it was an old-fashioned kitchen. So I said, well, I'd make a pie, and I said, are these going to be judged? She said, oh no, they're just for atmosphere. Well, if I peel all those apples, I'll just put apples on the top, and I'll just fill it in with flour and then put on a crust. And I saw a nice little wedge taken out. It had been tasted. There was a little note beside. It looks nice, but it wasn't baked enough.
In the big top, it was a mass of color. Number one, it right smack in the center of the big top. And of course, the flowers. We sold everything from hanging bittersweets and bayberries to prickly pear cactus. The big flowers, raisins, or the Zinzer used to sell the dahlias, the big dahlias. They were big, colorful dahlias, and he used to sell the bulbs. And then the judge used to have exotic pots and plants. And the Judd family, well known in the florist business, used to sell all kinds of nice arrangements and plants. And then our family, we had greenhouses, and so we used to grow the little cactus plants and collector plants, and we used to make these straw flower bouquets.
Booths surrounded the Big Top area where concessionaires barked and demonstrated their products. There was something for everyone, from mops to convertible beds.
A few I remember are the vegetable slices, which are still on TV with the same corny jokes, such as the mother-in-law stabbing herself while slicing tomatoes the old-fashioned way and slicing one tomato so thin as to serve a whole party. Then there were the Wonder Knives, the eyeglass defoggers, and oh yes, the super magic car wax. This wax was so good you could pour acid on the fender, light alcohol fires, etc., and never damage it.
Back in the early days, the fair had no Big Top. The first permanent indoor area for exhibitors was a building 105 feet long by 90 wide, with 2 wings. The farmers offered everything from Connecticut-grown tobacco to home-brewed wine. While the manufacturing section included such items as hats, boots, saddles, carriages, and stoves. Fire continued to be a concern for the fair. On Sunday in 1916, fire swept through the Big Top, destroying the tent, booths, and the main office building when it was struck by lightning. In 1941, the fair leased the main building for the winter, and the inner oval was flooded and frozen into an ice skating rink. The kerosene heater was inadvertently tipped over, and the main building and offices were burned once more to the ground. With insurance payments and another mortgage, a new main office building and Big Top area was designed and built, along with a new tent and fittings. The 1941 fair opened, as they say, bigger and better than ever. Knowing that music helps to create a festive atmosphere, a center stage was built to provide continuous musical entertainment. Wendell Cook and his famous concert band played for fairs, circuses, and concerts around the country. At the Danbury Fair, he played daily shows under the Big Top.
I felt privileged to be able to do a show there under the Big Top and in the platform Everybody coming in, sometimes they'd stop, sometimes they'd listen, but I could see they enjoyed it. And it was wonderful because there were all kinds of people to be interviewed. I remember doing the hour show, and then later on, my fiddler, Carl Swanson, and my son, Alan, was there with his drums one year. I would sing some old ballads and even some old Negro spirituals.
To the left, round you go, circle to the left, do pass so, and corner by the right, you see, so around your own, and do an island on the left with the corner. Hi everybody, this is Al Brundage. I'm here at the great Danbury Fair, up at the end of the big top. We're down here among the pumpkins and the corn with a bunch of square dancers with a Pioneer Orchestra in the background. By the right, you swing that corner, lady, swing, whirl. You promenade that girl and promenade. Don't slow down, don't slow down. Head chuckles, wheel around. You star through, and a right and left through, and turn your girl, good. And dive through and pass through. You circle to the left this time. Well, now you're going wrong. Circle to the right the other way back and circle right. Now you're home. Couple one, lead to the right, circle four. Leave the lady, go to the next and circle three. Take that lady, go to the last and circle four. Leave her there, go home alone. Forward six, back you go alone. Just do, so right high and the left one low. Forward six, back you go, do a do, so do on the right one high, the left one low. Six, go forward and back, lone just do, so do. And the right one high, the left one low, and home you go, swing your partners all, everybody swing, and promenade, go round the ring. And now as couple two, lead right, circle four to the next, and circle three to the next, and circle four. Leave her there and home alone, and forward six, and back you go alone, just do, so do, and forward right and high, left one low, six, go forward and back, do, so do, with the right one high, the left one low, and now you're in, and home you go, and everybody swing your partners on.
There was something for everyone under the big top: agriculture, education, and entertainment. Rain or shine, it was a wonderful place to visit. The fairgrounds covered 143 acres, and besides the big top and offices, there were many other permanent buildings. The Connecticut building had exhibits of fine workmanship provided by the Guild of Connecticut Craftsmen. Colonial Hall was once the home for the Canine Bench Show, where some of the area's finest pedigrees were shown and competed for trophies and blue ribbon awards. Machinery Hall, with its 9,000 square feet, was used for the automobile show in the 1920s and 30s, and later displayed farm machinery. The Farm and Home Show sold convenience items for the home and automobile accessories. The Poultry Barn featured an outstanding variety of chickens, turkeys, geese, and ducks.
The poultry show. My father was superintendent for a number of years to the fair, and he would find exhibitors to put on displays of different breeds of poultry. We provided with very elaborate painting background scenes with stages in front of them where you could exhibit the different breeds, and there were lots of people involved in that. Good poultry breeders and fanciers would supply the birds. It was up to my dad to be sure that the poultry barn was full of something for the public to see. I think we did a good job at that.
The Danbury Fair was one of the largest and best agricultural fairs in the East. Animal barns were built so horse and cow breeders would have a place to comfortably house and show their animals. Many breeds of horses and ponies were on exhibit, including the Golden Palominos. And the famous Budweiser Clydesdales. A number of the buildings were transformed into exhibits of history and education, as well as entertainment. One good example was the P.T. Barnum Museum. P.T. Barnum was a native of the neighboring town of Bethel, Connecticut. Here you could learn about the life of Tom Thumb, see the mechanical life-size replica of Jumbo the elephant, and see perhaps the biggest hoax in Barnum's career, the Cardiff Giant.
In the Barnum Museum, we had all the animated stuff.
like the elephant and all that. The elephant was run by different motors inside. One motor wagged his tail, another pushed his stomach in and out, another with his trunk, another moved his head. Then we had the fat lady and the hoochie coochie girl. Somebody after the fair threw away an old pair of work shoes. I mean, they weren't even fit for the dump. They were in such great shape. John said, "Oh, give me those, give me those." He said, "I want those for the Barnum Museum." We'll tell them everybody that's P.T. Barnum's shoes.
In the Ford Museum, you could hear and read about the history of Henry Ford while looking at some of the early Ford products like the Model T, known as the Tin Lizzie. For pure fun and to the delight of the youngsters, the old goat barns along Bacchus Avenue were magically transformed into Cinderella Land. Not just a series of pictures, but a trip into a storybook that came to life before your eyes as you journeyed through the story. The glass slipper was featured in surroundings that were covered with sparkles. The most wonderful part of the fantasy trip was beautiful Cinderella in her long gown and white gloves, and the kindly fairy godmother holding her magic wand, waiting to greet and talk with everyone. It was fun, it was exciting, spectacular, a miracle that took place every afternoon, the Danbury Fair Street Parade. Only those behind the scenes knew what a miracle it really was when at 2:30 p.m. the drum major blew his whistle. And the marching band stepped off to the beat of the big bass drum, and the Danbury Fair Street Parade was a reality. With thousands of people jamming the midways, hundreds of marchers, animals, and floats still managed to make their way to the parade starting points.
I was very fortunate because I got for 11 years to be a clown at the Danbury Fair. With Buck Nolan and Hobo and Uncle Jay. God, I was 17 different costumes we had for me. I remember coming there in the morning and Buck would come and get me at my father's stand and put the makeup on. And after we would come home at night, I didn't want to take the makeup off. I used to go to sleep with it.
That parade was unbelievable. Lots of fairs are trying to copy it today. I don't think anybody could do it the way Danbury Fair did it because they don't have the facilities, but it was very crowded. Everybody thought it was very dangerous. People were within a foot of those big horses, but nobody ever got hurt. We always got through. We do loads of parades, Macy's Parade, the big circus parade in Milwaukee. We still do lots of parades, but nothing was as exciting as Danbury.
Jarvis both loved this part of the fair. Dressed in bright red ringmaster outfits, the parade gave them the opportunity to exhibit their flair for showmanship and a chance to meet the public and greet the exhibitors and marchers in the parade. After winding through the entire fairgrounds, the parade would enter the racetrack from the north end of the grandstand. Arriving in front of the grandstand, Irv would step to the microphone where he took over the job of announcer. Then John would greet the grandstand crowd with words like, "Welcome, folks. Welcome, everybody, to the great Danbury Fair. We're so glad you came. And we've been blessed with a beautiful day, and we hope you all have a wonderful stay at the fair. There's so much to see. Stay late and come back again tomorrow." And as John Leahy waved to the crowd, he made his way to the racetrack where he would shake hands with the marchers and thoroughly enjoy the ritual of passing out blue ribbons to just about everyone.
association of drum corps. It's called the Greater Danbury Area Drum Corps Association. Right now we have 19 drum corps, and I became the first president. In fact, I'm still president. Drum corps like the Danbury Drum Corps, they've been around since 1927. They're actually playing 60 years. Striders are celebrating their 50th, so they've been around a while too. I remember a few times where we had a mass retreat. We call in drum corps a retreat, which means that they just form adjacent to one another and would face the grandstand, so everybody would have a chance to see all the participants at one time.
Maybe 12, 15 years before the fair ended, I took over in the wardrobe department. That particular department had to do with getting all the costumes prepared, handing them out for all the different areas, Cinderella Land, people in the Dutch Village. All these costumes had to be gotten and put together.
It was well known that Governor John Dempsey enjoyed going to fairs, and he took the opportunity to ham it up when Wendell Cook invited him to lead his band while they played a typical circus number. Traditionally, Wednesday was Governor's Day at the fair. What better place for the large contingent of office holders and challengers to meet and greet the people than at the fair?
Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. Together shout it now. There's no one who can doubt it now.
A number of the parade participants were talented performers, and each was given the spotlight to show their skills while they thrilled the audience.
Sundance. When he was born, he was the ugliest thing you ever saw in your life. He had legs like a giraffe. And he grew and he grew and he grew and he grew. And when he was 2.5, I started taking him to the Danbury Fair with the all-Palomino Sheriff's Posse. Every year of his life, for 30 years, he went to the Danbury Fair. But then the big thing, of course, was the posse. And Mrs. Richmond down in Greenwich started it. And we would go there 2 or 3 times a month to practice.
For us, it was a very big deal every year. It was real chaos around the farm getting everything together, but once we got to the fair, everything fell together and just went as smooth as clockwork. A week before and a week after, we were shipping horses all over New England, rounded them up. Getting all the horses, and got to make sure all the harness is rigged up for them on all the different wagons. It was quite a deal. We used to work 50-something head of horses there every day, everything from donkeys, ponies, 6-horse hitch, for Belgians there. Every day we did the street parade, we had a 9-pony hitch, a 6-donkey hitch, 6 Belgians on a hitch wagon, 4 Belgians on a cage wagon, stagecoach with a pair, water wagon with a pair, coach with a pair on it. We feed 50 people 3 times a day of our own crew because we had so many horses there.
What Gene did better than petting zoos, he had the grandstand show. He'd have the racing ostriches, the racing camels, Herman the hippo, the unrideable elephants, and he had all those things. The elephant rides and the camel rides were just a side thing to him while he was at the fair putting on his grandstand show. These animals were all in all the movies, and he had a lot of those people working for him that worked the animals in the movie. He was a great showman, great showman.
Supervisor of the East Coast Clydesdale team, one of the 3 different traveling teams that goes across the country. The ages vary anywhere from 5 to 12 to 15, the oldest usually. And they usually come out when they're around 4 or 5 years of age, and they're weigh around 2,000 pounds. The ones that are on our team are usually the dark bay horses with the 4 white stockings. The wagon we have here that was at the Danbury Fair is one of our biggest wagons, but this particular wagon here is an 1885 Studebaker. It's one of the tallest and heaviest ones we got. We always have a Dalmatian dog that travels with us that sits up on top of the wagon. The harness they wear weighs about 120 to 140 pounds per horse. Me, I like my lead team high-strung, so they have little prance to them, you know. That's another one of the requirements to make the team is, you know, how their gait is and how they step and stuff.
Outdoor promoters will tell you that the weather has a tremendous effect on all phases of their events. It's always a gamble. John Leahy always said, the weather is the fair's biggest worry. Bright sunny skies guaranteed the arrival of large crowds. It became a local saying that Leahy's luck was responsible for the spell of good weather which seemed always to accompany the 10-day period of the fair. There were rainy days, however, and in 1978 it did rain on John's parade. Rained almost every day. Through the years, the management had continually looked for ways to create new attractions and to attract more people. In 1940, the fair leased its grounds to board member C. Stuart McLean to experiment with one of America's fastest-growing sports, midget auto racing. A fifth-mile paved track was built inside the half-mile dirt oval, and that summer the mighty midgets roared in Danbury for the first time. With some of the best-known drivers in the country, midget racing at the Danbury Fair Speedway began to grow. The crowds filled the grandstands each Saturday night. That fall, the midgets were one of the feature attractions of the 1940 Danbury Fair. During 1941, while the midgets were enjoying another successful season, management's attention focused on the production of the 1942 fair. But it was not to be. For just as things were beginning to look up, World War II went into full swing, and the United States became totally involved in the war. Government rationing of gasoline, tires, and food items forced the fair to close its gates for 4 long years. Financially strapped with no income and numerous continuing expenses, the fair was in trouble and should not have survived the war years. The management took on more bank loans with the idea that the war would soon end, hoping that with a few successful fairs they would be able to pay off their debts. Meanwhile, maintenance ceased and the old buildings and grounds fell into despair and shabbiness. White nights often seem to appear when days are darkest. The Danbury Fair found its night in the personage of John W. Leahy. Born in June of 1895, he lived a typical Danbury boyhood life. After completing the 8th grade, he learned the machinist trade, later working for the Mallory Hat Company. Not being one to sit still, he opened his own machine shop at age 20. With the invention of the automatic oil burner for heating the home, he began delivering fuel oil and kerosene as the local city service dealer. With the able assistance of his wife, the former Gladys Stetson, a Danbury high school teacher, he added a propane gas business. As a boy, he developed an interest in anything smacking of show business, always marveling at anything new and unique. Thus, the fair was a big event in his life, and his biggest dream was to one day be associated with the Danbury Fair. As fate would have it, his opportunity came one morning when a customer stopped in to pay an oil bill. Her conversation with John Leahy ended with his purchasing a share of Danbury Fair stock that had been in her family for years for the sum of $100. He continued to buy shares, and in April 1943, he was elected to the board of directors, and at a meeting that same year, Gladys Leahy was elected to the board. John Leahy put up $10,000 of his own money to meet current expenses and was committed to reopening the fair. With boundless energy and enthusiasm, he went about the task of buying more shares of stock, even convincing Morty Rundle, the fair president and son of the original founder, to part with a large portion of his shares. In 1944, John Leahy, now the majority stockholder, was elected to the office of general manager. A year later, Gladys Leahy was elected treasurer. The fair couldn't have been in better hands as the Leahy regime took off on a non-stop flight that would work wonders with the nearly defunct operation. The fair had found its white knight, and John Leahy was fulfilling a boyhood dream. With a small army of carpenters, painters, and laborers, work began in refurbishing the fair. They repaired roofs, replaced sills, paved the roads, and added sparkling new coats of white and green paint to all the buildings. The fair began to take on a clean, bright look it never had before. The war ended in 1945, and midget auto racing returned in early fall and ran into November. Race fans jammed the grandstands again on Saturday nights, which brought in some badly needed revenue. With construction and refurbishing continuing at a wild pace, the fair was ready to open in 1946 for the first time since the beginning of the war, and its first run with John W. Leahy and Company at the reins. There were problems that year. The water wells went dry, pumps burned out, and there were a couple of cold and rainy days. But the public, starved for entertainment through the long war years, came out in droves. The fair's paid attendance reached 163,000, an attendance record that would not be broken again until 1961. For the young, the most exciting spot on the fairgrounds is the Carnival Midway. This is the place thrill seekers come to find excitement and test their nerves. The Danbury Fair had one of the cleanest and merriest ride and show midways in the East. Through the years, some of the largest amusement shows in the country played at the Danbury Fair, bringing spectacular new thrill rides along with the old favorites, like the Sky Wheel, the Paratrooper, the Himalaya, the Octopus, the Tilt-A-Whirl, the Skydiver, the Roundup, and everyone's favorite, the Carousel. The Midway provided a variety of typical carnival attractions, like the Funhouse, motorcycles riding on a vertical board wall, the Dancing Girls, the Freak Show, Fire Eaters, Sword Swallowers, and as the Barkers would say, step right up. They're all on the inside, folks, and they're alive. Midways with game tents were placed side by side where you could test your skills. Only a quarter, knock off 3 bottles, and you win a prize. And games of chance like ring toss, the penny toss, darts and balloons, the basketball shoot, Wheels of Fortune. Hey, buddy, win your girl a teddy bear. There was a special section of the grounds with rides just for children. They could ride live ponies, slide down the Happy Slide, ride the merry-go-round, giggle at the clowns, or be amazed at the magic show. The last Friday of the fair was Danbury Day, the day 15,000 school children were allowed out of school to enjoy the fair. The management provided free tickets, which the teachers passed out to every student in the Danbury school system. But one year, in 1947, the Board of Education voted to discontinue the holiday.
I went to school that morning. There was a considerable crowd of kids outside the school. They wouldn't go in. So we all stood there kind of yelling, and nobody wanted to go in because they wanted to go to the fair. So we all marched right down the middle of the street, down White Street, up Main Street, and up West Street to the Board of Education. And we stood there and yelled for a while, and then we said, this isn't going to do any good. And we said, let's go to the fair. So everybody started off. They walked to the fair. And then John let them in. And that was the end of Board of Education's proposal to have school on that famous Friday.
The fair offered so many special events and attractions that it was almost impossible to see them all in one day. There were tractors and bulldozers for sale, with demonstrations to hold your attention. Brian Anderson and Jim Colbert showed their strength and skill at wood sawing and chopping competition and demonstrations. They often gave away their creations to a member of the audience. Mobile homes and campers tempted fairgoers to travel. Harry Albacker's Magic Act. Circus World with Jerry Lipko and his chimpanzees. The Petting Zoo. Contests for children. Everywhere you went, there was music. Wendell Cook and his circus concert band. Al Brundage called for his professional square dancers.
3 hands. Now with the left hand, square through 4 hands, count to 4.
Carolyn Chase and the AAA Ranch Gang. Stella Donnelly. Marion King. Red Brigham and the Harmony Hayriders.
Let me go the way that you thrill me, honey. You'll never know your love and charms, caress and arm.
Organist Emil Bouzet. And the Polka King, Victor Zembruski. In the earlier days, oxen were important farm animals, pulling plows and wagon loads of hay. The question of who owned the best pair was settled at the pulling contest in Blue Ribbon Stadium. They were driven to the fair along dusty dirt roads in a 20 to 25 mile radius.
Years ago, Beardsley, he had all kinds of Devon cattle, and they would drive them. Not only him, but a lot of other farmers around, because they participate in the pulling contest, and they would drive them from Roxbury and Southbury. They would start early in the morning, and they would drive their cattle right to Danbury Fair, drive their oxen right to Danbury Fair, and they would stay there all week, you know. They said they had a schoolhouse up in Purchase. When they drove their cattle, a long string of cattle, they all got out from the schoolhouse and watched them go through with their cattle. Danbury Fair.
Some of the oxen were for show only, but the oxen and horse pulls were a favorite attraction that drew large crowds at each show. The event started with the Parade of Champions, where the competitors would show their muscular prize cattle to the audience and to the officials. The pit in Blue Ribbon Stadium was considered a good one, paved in Connecticut River Valley red clay. A judge stakes a pin to mark the position of the stone boat, loaded with 2 cement blocks marked 1,000 pounds each for the first heat. Wayne Allen, superintendent and announcer for the contest, calls out the name of the first contestant. The teamster, with a final glance to check the yoke position and the alignment of his team with the load, cracks a supple whip in the air and shouts, "Hip-ya!" The wooden stone boat slides forward as if propelled by the roaring crowd. Wayne Allen shouts, "It's a draw," meaning the oxen pulled the load a full 6 feet. Any good team can pull twice its weight, but the ranks of the contestants thin as the blocks are piled on in 1,000-pound increments in successive heats. The stone boat now moves in inches until the draw is accomplished. A top winning team can pull over 7,000 pounds.
Out in that lot where they used to park the cars and the buses and everything, used to get pretty muddy and around in there. They'd bring out a couple of pair of oxen and charge them fellas $5 to get them out, haul them out. So they made money. If they didn't win by pulling, they won by pulling out the cars.
Another feature of Blue Ribbon Stadium, widely enjoyed, was a sheep shearing contest under the direction of Superintendent Norman Husted.
There's a correct way to do it and a wrong way. There are certain holds that you put on a sheep and positions so that you don't nick them, they don't kick and fight. The shears have to lay on the skin in such a way that you don't nick them. Theoretically, the fleece should come off all in one piece. That's an art in itself, being able to do that, and we think the public really enjoyed that. We'd try to shear 3 or 4 in a given show over there just to give them an idea of how it's done, and then we'd hand out samples of wool.
A favorite attraction at any fair, and a necessary one, is food. At the Danbury Fair, there was a treat for every palate.
Now, food, especially the onions and peppers, you know, when they would fry the sausage, onions, and peppers, and then you get hit with the apple pies over in Dutch Village. Those pies would fill the air, especially on a cold day.
The corners pancake booth. Joe Pulowski used to be in there and always hollering out to everybody, "Pancakes better than Mom used to make," you know. And he was running that for a good number of years. And the Kiwanis Club made a lot of money on that. It was our big fundraiser at that time.
So we had quite an entourage of items. We had meatball and sausage grinders. We had French fries. We had roast beef grinders. We had hamburgers. We had hot dogs. And that was all coming out of one stand.
And they saw the name Zarcone. Well, these people came over one day and they said, "Oh, Zarcone, could I buy one?" They didn't know it was calzone or Zarcone. And we all said, "Sure, which one do you want?"
My father used to make his own sausage, and people never forgot that. And he says, if you eat anywhere, eat at Zarcone's.
One big happy family there, you know, even though they were competition, it wasn't a dog-eat-dog type of thing. It was, hey, you got your thing, we have ours. You certainly couldn't walk by smelling the sausage on the grill, the popcorn, just impossible to walk by.
From childhood, John Leahy had a fondness for fairs, circuses, carnivals, and in later life, auctions. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that he loved to buy things for the fair, especially antiques. All you had to do was look around you. Every nook and rooftop had a figurine, carriage, or ornament of one kind or another on it.
He always had you looking up. You know, you're always looking up into the sky. The Indians were big. The lumberjacks were big. Farmer Brown was big. Uncle Sam. You know, that whole uplift, your head is always spinning, looking up, looking up. What greater thing are we going to see now?
He especially enjoyed catering to the taste of children. If he couldn't find the exact piece to fit a fairy tale setting, story, or rhyme, he would call on his own talented staff, who created a vast collection of Storyland characters made of lumber, chicken wire, and fiberglass, some nearly 30 feet tall. Some items in the collection were authentic pieces with an early history to them. This electric trolley car was built in 1888. This is an original wood-burning steam engine, the Daniel Nason. It ran when Lincoln was nominated back in 1858. It took 2 years to negotiate its purchase and bring it to the Danbury Fair. The majority of people who come to the fair want to be amazed, amused, and thrilled. And the most thrilling spectacles usually take place in front of a grandstand. The Danbury Fair's grandstand was called the Race Arena. The grandstand and a half-mile dirt track were originally built for trotting races. The trotters ran successfully until the 1940s. In those days, a race starter had to yell to the drivers through a megaphone to keep them in line. It was Danbury starter Steve Phillips and his son who invented the still widely used Phillips folding starting gate. In 1908, the horses shared the track with big car racing, or sprinters as they were also called. The top drivers in the country raced here. Ralph De Palma in his famous Fiat Cyclone. Ira Vale, who became the race director for the first midget race at Danbury, and Ted Horn, who established track records while winning the last big car race at Danbury in 1939. In 1912, the crowds were thrilled as players risked life and limb in wild games of auto polo, and even motorcycle racing enjoyed a short run. Midget auto racing started in the summer of 1940 and drew large crowds before and after the war years.
Danbury used to be packed. You know, Saturday nights, man, the midgets were strong up there. You know, the grandstands were filled every time they ran up there.
Danbury was, one of my tracks. When you make the semi, you're made a feature. So I got in there, then I got upside down, man. That was the end. Oh, I got my arm cut up and landed up in that Danbury hospital for 2 weeks. Oh, I ran with Dutch Schaefer, Mike Nazarek, Tony Bonadias, Duncan, Johnny Kay, Bill Schindler, Ted Tapp, Georgie Rice, Johnny Rice.
Perhaps one of the oddest and most ambitious undertakings in the history of the fair was the building of an inland oval water raceway right in front of the grandstand. A track was dug out around the outside of the midget track, then water was pumped in from the nearby swamp. The Aqua Way opened in 1948 and ran 4 meets. The drivers were drawn mainly from among hydroplane owners. The speedboats raced Wednesday nights and ran heats, semifinals, and a feature the same as the midgets. Racing was exciting, and the crowd started to build, but there were problems. The motors had to be pulled to start, which took too long, and the narrow homestretch caused damage to the wooden hulls, which required more costly repairs than the owners could afford. During that winter, John Leahy called on his cousin Harold Kohler to reproduce fiberglass speedboats formed from the wooden hulls, while mechanics Charles Garrig and Everett Hislop installed Crosley motors.
He started building his own, had Harold Kohler there, and brought them up, and we installed the Crosley engines in them, and the drive shafts and steering wheels and everything. He bought the loose components there, and we assembled them in the old machinery hall. Charlie Garrig worked on them, and I worked on them.
The Aqua Way opened the 1949 season with 18 flashy colored speedboats with self-starting engines, and the people came. Bruce Parker, world water ski champion, and his ski bells performed between heats. However, after a few Saturday nights of midget racing and Wednesday night speedboat racing, it became clear that both shows were suffering from a division of patronage. The local public could not support 2 shows a week. The more established midget racing continued, and the waterway was eventually filled in. Many Connecticut racetracks began to switch to stock car racing, and were having surprisingly good luck with the latest form of entertainment. Stock cars were old coupes and sedans. They were much cheaper to build and run than the midgets, and racing was tight and reckless. The fans loved the action. In Brewster, New York, a group of enthusiasts carved out a rough track and called themselves the Southern New York Racing Association. The fair management met with the association and liked what they saw. An agreement was formed between the Danbury Fair and the New York Club, and in 1952 the waterway was replaced by a 1/3 mile dirt racetrack. The sight of flying dirt and crashing cars was spectacular, but the ruts in the dirt track caused too many yellow flags, which slowed the action and brought about another small miracle. In just 1 week's time, the entire track was regraded and paved with 6 layers of blacktop. They never missed a meet.
To satisfy John's requirement that we start grading on a Sunday morning. And we started grading, and we paved that track in 1 week, and they had the races the following Saturday night on the new pavement. And we worked all day long, and everybody was ready to drop, and it was getting dark. Come on, boss, come on, we gotta go home, we gotta go home. John heard one of them, he went up and turned the lights on. They worked all night long that night.
With the newly paved track, racing was faster and better than ever. Record crowds filled the grandstand, and local drivers became heroes.
In the early days, everybody had the old coupes and old sedans. I always liked Danbury. I mean, I don't know, like the first time I got on it, I sort of fell in love with that place. And you know, like I used to venture off once in a while, and go here and there just for something else to do. And I liked Danbury. Well, I won 9 point championships down there. And then, yeah, when I first started running, I won the championship in 54 and 55. Then in the 60s, pretty heavy there for a while.
It looked like rain, so they put the modified feature ahead of the sportsman's race. And it just worked out where it didn't rain, and we won the pole that night. We started first and finished first, so we got the last race ever. And after being there all your life in the stands since you were 4 or 5 years old, it just kind of worked out nice.
The brightly painted grandstand, paved racetrack, manicured lawns, and the surrounding hills all came together to create a magnificent sight. With 2 World War II searchlights circling the sky and a huge American flag blowing high above the infield, many called it the most beautiful racing plant in the East. There was another kind of horsepower that thrilled the audiences each weekend of the fair, the Hell Drivers, Thrill Drivers, Daredevils. They were called by many names, but they all skillfully put their brand new cars through unbelievable and dangerous stunts. A stunt driver and IndyCar champion who thrilled audiences in Danbury for many years, and at times performed here with his son, the late Joey Chitwood. Chitwood Jr.'s sons, Michael and Tim, are still on the road.
My family has run at the Danbury Fair over the years, starting way back in the 40s, and I was there myself in 1970. Joey Jr. and Joey Sr. did many shows at the Danbury Fair during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even into the 70s. We always enjoyed Danbury Fair, and we're going to miss it.
Ladies and gentlemen, now featuring the dangerous passing leap in midair, the Flying Lamars. Of all forms of entertainment, nothing captures the hearts of children of all ages like the circus. Fair Week, the Danbury Fair presented its own circus, produced and staged by showman Arch Daly of Hartford, who brought together some of the world's most famous acts.
I did a swinging ladder over top of the grandstand there. They had the rope hung up there, and I worked there. But there was other acts, of course. It was a great time. We always enjoyed being up there, the family. It was most of the family acts taking place. She refused to go over the elephant trainer, and different ones tried taking her over. But my husband finally let her over.
Marcia used to do the elephants, because at one time Hunt's elephants used to be on the Seal Test Big Top Circus every other week, because it was filmed in Camden, New Jersey, and the Hunts lived in New Jersey. They would have the Al and Joyce Vidville's elephants one week and the Hunt brothers' elephants the next week. Ed McMahon started his TV career as a clown on the Seal Test Big Top Circus.
Presenting the greatest circus display that has ever been booked for any fair. Ivan the Great, the human cannonball, who will be shot from a cannon. Many people traveled to the fair by train that stopped at the Union Station on White Street in Danbury. From there, they had a choice to either take the shuttle train or to have more fun, the trolley car. The fare for the train or trolley was only a dime.
You get on the trolley car, come up to Main and West Street in Danbury, transfer there onto the car that went out to the fairgrounds, and ride the trolley out to the fairgrounds down in front of the main gate. Then you'd get off the trolley and go into the fairgrounds, and the trolley would turn and go back to Danbury and pick up another load.
Some people chose to walk to the fair. It was a pleasant way to exercise, a good place to meet your friends, and perhaps even find a date along the way. Walking also saved you 20 cents, the cost of a hot dog and a bottle of soda.
As a young person, you hope to have a date for the fair. That was the thing. You hoped it would be an important date. Of course, you always saw people that maybe you hadn't seen for a year, and that was a great event, too.
Those who could afford one drove their Model T Fords to the grounds, and they jammed the parking lots. It must have been difficult to find your car among all those identical-looking black flivvers.
Back in those days, money wasn't so plentiful, and I can remember us bringing our lunch, and we'd go back at noon, back to our Model T in the parking lot, and sit in there and eat our lunch. But then later, my father enjoyed having his lunch at various stands.
By today's standards, the style of dress for the fair would be considered almost formal, as the ladies wore long dresses with jackets and lots of lace. Some wore gloves and even carried a parasol. Most wore large bonnets. The gentlemen wore three-piece suits, white shirts with stiff collars and cuffs and fancy tie pins. Many carried canes, and of course no man would be seen in public without his Danbury-made felt hat that somehow stayed on even while enjoying the rides. On weekends, over 60,000 people would converge on the Danbury Fair from all directions. They came by car, by bus, on foot, and by air, with the Danbury Airport being conveniently located across the street. Traffic control was shared by the Danbury Police, Fair Police, and State Police, who did a terrific job moving thousands of vehicles into the fair's parking lots. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was hired to operate the ticket booths, help with crowd control, parking, and to provide added security for visiting celebrities and dignitaries. One of the busiest functions of the Fair Police was the reuniting of lost children with their parents. Near the police station stood the 30-foot figure of Farmer John, who towered over most of the buildings, and was the first place parents would head for if their children wandered off or were swallowed up by the crowd. The parents usually found their lost ones with smiles on their faces as they were treated to ice cream or cotton candy.
We took care of the lost children, and sometimes, I think the parents would just drop them off and leave them for the day. They dropped them off. We had them from the time that they'd come in at about 9:30 until about 5:30. They'd get ready to go home. We'd have the same children. They'd be left there all day. We just took care of them and gave them lunch. We had a place for the lost children, but we tried to keep them happy. And then, of course, they had company once in a while because there would be other lost children. We'd try to keep them entertained for the day.
The fair management had tried various special events between fair dates, few of which proved financially successful. In 1962, the 4-H clubs were brought together to present a horse show. A traveling professional rodeo show was booked and performed in front of the grandstand, but the action was too far from the public and much of the excitement and impact was lost. Independence Day drum corps concerts, followed by firework displays, were offered for several years. Ben Boyer and James Westerfield, two gentlemen with a great deal of theatrical experience, presented the idea of a theater in the round under the big top to run in the summer of 1950. John Leahy liked the idea, and a series of 12 operettas were selected. Melody Fair opened in June 1950 to a full house with The Merry Widow. The second operetta, The Chocolate Soldier, was another hit. Anything Goes held up only on the weekends. The seventh week, theater goers turned out in force to applaud Mimi Benzel in Naughty Marietta. However, in spite of quality performances and low prices, $1.20 for bleacher seats and $2.40 for ringside yacht chairs, by August, the producers realized their adventure was heading for a financial loss. John Leahy could not believe that such popular entertainment couldn't be built up to pay its way. So he called on producer Greek Evans, who lived in nearby Norwalk and pioneered summer musicals in the 1930s, to produce and direct the Melody Fair productions. Leahy's main worry of a fire under the Big Top triggered the idea of using the concrete grandstand as a theater with a stage built in front. Sections of the Big Top canvas were suspended between the proscenium and the grandstand roof in case of rain. The original wooden grandstand burned to the ground on the last day of the fair in 1922. It was replaced with a new fireproof structure of steel and cement, which lasted until 1981. On July 20th, 1951, Melody Fair opened with a student prince, followed by New Moon, Firefly, The Merry Widow, Rose Marie, and closed with Blossom Time. Again, the people came, but not enough to turn a profit. John was cured forever of all theatrical ambitions. When the Danbury Fair opened in 1969, it would be 100 years old. By the end of the 1968 fair, some planning had begun, but there was little on paper and not much had actually been accomplished. John Leahy and his assistant manager, C. Irving Jarvis, who had formed a compatible working association and a close friendship through the years, were ready to spend many winter days at the White Street office in coming up with creative and new attractions for the fair's 100th anniversary. Irv was no stranger to the amusement business. His father, William Jarvis, operated the Lake Kenosha Amusement Park and was a superintendent at the fair. From the Kenosha Amusement Park, Irv Jarvis went on to invent games and run midways at both Rockaway and Rye Beach amusement parks in New York. He rejoined the fair in the 1940s. As work began on the Centennial Fair, Irv was struck with a heart attack and unfortunately would never see the 100th anniversary fair, for a second attack took his life in May of 1969. That sad event called for some quick changes. John Leahy was 74 years old, and he called on Fred Fern, who had been Leahy's manager of the fuel and gas business for many years, and myself to meet the high expectations of the community in running the 100th anniversary fair.
The real break came when the new Interstate Highway 84 opened in 1961, and later Interstate 684, leading to a doubling of attendance. From this point, everything went well. The fair gained much prominence among fairs and was designated America's most unique fair. With a great group of wonderful employees and associates, the fair moved right along, improving more each year. With the addition of arts, crafts, and antique shows, and increasing popularity of the stock car races, it really was a great Danbury Fair.
I literally grew up at the fair. As a toddler, my family lived in a farmhouse at the end of the parking lot. My father was with the organization, and my mother worked in the office Saturday nights during the races. As a young boy, I remember following Uncle John, as we called him, around the grounds, and I guess I picked up more about the business than I had realized. Summer and school vacations found me working with other students and seasonal help at the annual maintenance chores required on the grounds. For several years during the fair, I had run a family-owned concession stand. Then came 1969, and Fred Fern and I found ourselves responsible for producing perhaps the most important fair in its history. As always with the Danbury Fair, things would get worse before they got better. For at the same time, a more serious threat to the fair arose in the personage of the chairman of the Danbury Airport Commission. He was attempting to persuade the city fathers that the Danbury Airport was the key to the growth of the city. But in order to expand, the main runway would have to be extended, even at the expense of the Danbury Fair, as the new runway would wipe out the fair's largest parking lot. With the biggest year of the fair just ahead, the management had little time to deal with this threat. Demetrius A. Cezanne was hired specifically to work on the airport problem. Cezanne knew the amusement business. He had a gift of gab in an unflappable and aggressive manner. Within weeks, the city government, newspapers, and most importantly, the Airport Commission had been affected by him. And shortly after the 1969 fair, the proposal was officially dropped. Demetrius Cezanne had been a carnival and amusement park operator for most of his life, and while fighting the airport, Cezanne was teaching me the amusement business from the ground level. and he figured importantly in our success that year. Fred Fern and I got through the 1969 fair in fine fashion. The 100th anniversary fair broke an attendance record with 303,000 paid admissions. As Fred Fern and I began to gain experience in the business, we focused on finding new and creative uses for the fairgrounds. The 1970 fair was extended to 10 days to include Columbus Day. The added Monday proved successful and became a permanent change. In 1974, the fairgrounds played host to a symphony orchestra concert directed by Leonard Bernstein and Michael Tilson Thomas in celebrating the 100th birthday of local composer Charles Ives. This successful event raised money to build the outdoor musical facility on the Western Connecticut University campus, known today as the Charles Ives Center. In July of 1970, we produced the Great Danbury Arts and Crafts Fair, which exhibited and sold high-quality craft items along with an art show. It was another success, running for 7 years and annually attracting over 30,000 people. As the crowds increased at both the fair and races, a dark cloud loomed over us with the illness of John Leahy. After 2 years of failing health, on March 19, 1975, Mr. John W. Leahy passed away. The life of John Leahy is a story in and of itself, a tale of rags to riches, success and failure, one of great dreams, wonderful enthusiasm, showmanship, and perception of human nature. Certainly one of Danbury's most colorful citizens. On the morning of May 16, 1979, the executors of John Leahy's estate officially entered into an option agreement with the Wilma Wright Company of Rochester, New York, for the sale of the Danbury Fairground property for the purpose of constructing a regional mall. Preparing and staking out for the 1981 fair was difficult, knowing we were doing it for the last time.
When we went over there to what we call stake out, most all the contracts had been written in the office. We used to have a great big plot plan of the whole grounds. Every contract had a number. And when we staked out, we put the number on each side of the stake. We put a stake here, measure 20 foot down, put this guy's number, he's there. It was quite a detailed job, and we used to spend Saturdays and Sundays, probably 3 or 4 Saturdays or Sundays. It was quite an experience.
As difficult as it was, much creative planning went into making the final fair a memorable one. On Saturday morning, October 2nd, 1981, the Great Danbury Fair opened its gates for the last time. Fairgoers came in unprecedented numbers. Everyone wanted to be part of the last fair. The final tally was 404,000 admissions, an all-time record. Even with the long hours and hard work, the fair was a fun place. I especially enjoyed my years as the grandstand announcer, where I had the opportunity to meet and greet the many dignitaries and entertainers. It was a privilege to be part of it. At 7 p.m. on Monday, October 12, 1981, the Great Danbury State Fair closed its gates for the last time. It was over.
We didn't have one good day. The first day was cold and windy and nasty, and the second day, the sun was shining a little bit like this, but it was a cold, extremely cold. And I think Thursday and Friday it tried to rain, it drizzled, the wind, did everything. There was enough equipment there for man came in, he could open a theme park. Today, to replace that stuff would cost multiples of millions of dollars. We had celestic figures of ducks and mice and men and royal mounties and white horses and all kinds of cattle and elves and pixies. We had buyers from almost every state was represented. We had people coming from Germany, Italy, Japan, France. The auction for the fair was really a grand finale for a way of life in this area of Danbury.
Wednesday, March 31st through Monday, April 5th, 1982, 6 short days was all it took to auction off over 112 years of the Danbury Fair's assets and history. The Danbury Fair was known throughout the land. Shots of its midways were used for national advertising and fair scenes in major motion pictures. It was a yearly event that involved every facet of the community. It had an amazing influence on the area's businesses, economy, politics, and education. The fair attracted thousands of concessionaires and visitors, providing local and regional business with extra income that many depended on each year to help pay their rent and educate their children. The owners and managers were proud of the fair they produced for over 100 years in Danbury, and the people who supported them were proud to have one of the finest fairs in the country in their home state of Connecticut.
I can still close my eyes and see every inch of the Danbury Fairground. I almost cried even as an adult when the Danbury Fair closed forever. It made so many millions of people very happy for so many years.
When you mention Danbury, it's the Stetson hats and the Danbury Fair.
I think about every concessionaire in the country tried to get into Danbury Fair, and pretty much all of them were. It was like a big family. You all met every year there, and it was the greatest thrill in the world to be there. So I just loved it.
It was a fantastic setup. When I got word that we're about to close up, next year would be the last year, I actually got sick. I was there 23 years. Everything was beautiful, and everybody was happy.
Everybody says they wish it could come back, but if you built it someplace else, it wouldn't have the flavor. It took lots of years to develop that fair, and I think John Leahy did more for that fair than any other single person. You know, he was a showman. He was a great showman, and he loved every minute of it.
John Leahy, he liked that there, you know. He liked the fair, and if he stayed alive, they would never take it down. You know that. They would never take it down because he sure liked that.
It was a fun time for me, and it was fun working with all the people that were there. They were all show people. The people got more than what they paid for.
And it was ours, too. You know, you felt like it was yours. Everybody felt like it was their fair.
There'll never be anything like it again, and I miss it. We'll miss it forever, but I'm glad I have those memories.
May I have your attention, please? As usual, the 10th and last day of the fair is upon us. For the past several years, I have had the privilege of closing the fair each year. This year, I must announce the lowering of the curtain